don't know that we had time to be nervous, really.
Yeah, we really didn't. One of the other things we didn't talk about in that time frame of testing on Friday, that Saturday, we had to swap everything on our rifles over. Mm-hmm. So we had new scopes.
Yeah, we didn't make weight.
Yeah. Going into Saturday morning, our rifles were not light enough to shoot King of 2 Mile. We're flying out on the following Friday. So we have new scopes. We swapped from MOA to mils because mils are God's numbers.
Armaments, Chapter 2, verses 9 to 21.
We have new rails, so we went from a 60 MOA rail, which is 60 inches at 100, to a 90 MOA rail to give us enough vertical adjustment to shoot 2 miles without having to hold over too much. We had new muzzle brakes. We had to, one of Mike's friends got us hooked up and made us titanium muzzle brakes so we could make weight. That was a godsend because without those brakes, we might have had to lop a couple inches off our barrels to be able to do it, which once again means more load development. So we have to get the titanium muzzle brakes on. So we're trying to swap everything over on the rifles. We're trying to figure out how we're going to do it. And on top of that, I had a little girl with me. So Ellie's in there with me. So we got a little girl in the gunsmith shop helping us on the rifles.
She did a great job.
She was spectacular, but it was this interesting moment of, it was so cool to have her there, to be in that moment with us, and you're trying to problem solve and trying to make sure she doesn't fix anyone else's guns, But it was a really cool moment, but it was one of those, once again, emotional roller coasters of, is this going to work? Are we going to make weight? Because even with all that stuff, at that point in time, we didn't know if we were going to make weight.
No.
So we get the guns put together, we get everything taken care of. Ellie doesn't throw any rifles off a shelf. It's kind of an initial win going into it. And we head over to Mike's shop because he has a really nice shipping scale. And then we can't find the scale. So now it's the next iteration of, dear Lord, what else could go wrong, of this emotional roller coaster. We end up finding the scale and they make weight.
They make weight. So with all the changes, we got about a pound out of each gun, which was huge.
We're very blessed with all the people we've had come around us and support us. Andrew helped us out tremendously in the Smith shop, making everything work. He was working on the threads for us, cutting stuff, modifying things for us right down to the last minute.
I think that probably helped us stay focused because you had to fix that particular problem, keep an eye on what the end goal was, make sure you could fit everything together. But it laid out a pretty clear path that we're not going to get there unless we solve this. Let's focus on solving this and move on to the next thing. So, that last 2 weeks, we went from a gun that wasn't shooting to having to get it solved and sorted, potentially going to a rebarrel, but got that fixed. Getting the guns qualified with all the new components on them, it came together actually surprisingly with enough time that we could comfortably reload on Wednesday, get prepped for all of the gear that needed to go on the plane with us on Thursday, and actually get some sleep this time. It's unusual. Normally we're loading at crazy hours of the night before the matches. So
I have to say, back in May, one of our friends told us, he said, hey, I spot directly behind him, and as he does with me, and so we yell out our win calls. Well, a lot of us shoot the same caliber, and one of our friends is like, hey, you're giving away win calls. And we shot a match with another one of our friends where we very much queued it up. We made a great win call, and then they had it right behind us to work off of. So he's like, you guys need to disguise your win calls. So after that, we started digging around to some different languages, and we ended up deciding on a language because we thought to ourselves it'd be really funny to learn a different language and then just like on the fly start calling wind in a different language. So after looking at a lot of ancient languages and different things like that and ridiculous stuff, we ended up at Mandarin because we liked the way the actual structure of numbers went. So we thought about this in May, and we thought to ourselves, you have a lot of time to do this. So as we boarded the plane, we figured it was probably a good time to learn Mandarin. So Peter speaks Mandarin. It was awesome. we decide on this 2.5-hour flight, which is spectacular. It's like a magic carpet ride. That we're going to learn Mandarin to call for this match. And
Give me Dan San right.
Camera's hitched.
Oh, camera's dead. That's
All right,
nice.
it's all right. Dan San right, Peter. Send.
Okay, sorry.
First round was the impact, guys. There we go. 2 of them. Shane, load!
I'm pretty nervous at this point because I'm like, hey, what's the fastest way to screw yourself? Oh, try and do something new for the first time in the biggest match you've ever shot. So yeah, that's where we started learning Mandarin. And when we say Mandarin, that's a very loose
It's
usage of the word.
somebody might recognize it as
Yeah.
Mandarin, but we had to learn how to count and provide a decimal point to give enough of a wind accuracy call that we could actually translate it to hits. And we spent a good part, if not most of the flight, and then the
Butchering Mandarin.
From 11 to 19, you're just saying 10 plus the number, right?
Okay.
So, sure, C.
Okay, so that's 14.
Yeah. Sure, Joe.
19.
Yeah. So it's just.
Sure, Boz 18.
Yeah.
So it's 10
Sure, Sam's 13.
plus the number.
Yeah.
So sure, Joe, G. Alright, so G, I've got to get 7 and 8,
You gotta stop looking at the wrong
and I've
one.
got to look at 7.
we had to make a couple of modifications where the numbers sounded similarly, where they would be distinctly different when all of the noise is going on at the line, where we may not be able to hear as well. But I think we pulled it off okay.
We did. We pulled it off good enough. We'd like to take a moment to demonstrate the deviation. So Peter, will you count to 10 using actual Mandarin?
Yeah, absolutely. So, 1、2、3、4、5、6、7、8、9、10。
All right, so here's our butchered version, which is Ling is 0. We have Yi, R, San. We change S to C, which sounds a lot like another number, which you'll realize in a minute. Then Wu, Lu. Those sound entirely too close to each other. And then you have Chi. So C and Chi, which is Chi being 7, C being 4, sound entirely too much alike. And then you have Ba, which was my favorite one, which is 8. And then we did Joe or Joel. I learned Joel first. We modified to Joe, and then we decided that either one, it doesn't freaking matter because we get what you're trying to say.
Yes.
And then you had
Sure.
Sure. Yeah. So and then Dan was Point.
Yes.
So that is our butchering of the Mandarin language that we
Which I
learned.
think was effective because that's like a code on top of another code. Everything else made it a lot better. Something that you guys were telling me on the flight over was you could not overstate just how strong that wind was. And the howling, especially when you have the amplified headsets and everything, I mean, you were having to scream at each other and like really force it out there. So that's when we ended up having to really take a look and how can we modify some of these words because they sound so similar. Because if you write it out, it's the same lettering just with different inflections to be something that can be discernible on the shooting line.
The first consideration when we touched down was meeting up with Walt because we were going to go help Walt set up for the match, which we knew was going to be a huge adventure and a lot of fun as we had helped him tear down when we flew out a couple years back. We had no clue how much of an adventure it was going to be, but I knew that he had been there for a day already, so my goal was to get there and help him as much as we could because we had already lost some time. That was our priority. Now the cool thing was we landed 3 minutes from the range, so it was pretty quick getting there. We were making some phone calls, but service out there super sketchy to try and find him. The neat thing was we were able to use that time to start working with some foliage and start qualifying how the wind moves foliage, at what mile per hour each type of plant moves, things like that. So we used our time pretty wisely. But that was our number one priority at that point was go help them out because we really didn't have to do anything shooting wise until about Sunday.
Yeah, and when we did finally meet up with him, he looks at us and says, "Okay, let's go. You guys got water? We're ready to roll." And we're looking around and like,
Do you have water? And I said, a little bit, because we had a little bit of water.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I hope this doesn't get too gnarly, because we've got, what do we have? We probably had about
2 or 3
two small bottles.
Oh, yeah, it wasn't a
Yeah.
lot. But we made do, and the first day, coming from low elevation to higher elevation, it was not too grueling, but it was a wake-up call.
I think we were all feeling it at that point. But the funny thing is, you're not going to say anything about it, because you're out there with Walt. And Walt's one of the hardest guys I've ever met. He's out there, he's 65 years old, dragging plates in by himself, hanging stuff, rappelling down. So you're like, yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
Absolutely, we're good. We have no problems. Yeah, let's do it. We don't feel a thing.
Yeah. And he was not feeling well, so it's like, you better keep up.
Yep, absolutely. It was a wild adventure. Hiking out there is some pretty interesting terrain. The first year when we flew out just to go watch it and we were helping them tear down, that we end up on the top of this ridge line, and Alex looks at us and goes, "Have you ever hiked in this terrain before?" Which we said, no. And he's like, "All right, let me give you some pointers." He goes, the loose dirt will slide. Be careful stepping on rocks, because they'll slide too. Don't grab the plants, because they'll either stab you or they'll get sap on you that doesn't come off. Those were all very good
And he said, "Good luck."
accurate advice. And then he says, "Good luck."
Yeah.
We're like, awesome. He was right about the sap, because I think I might have just finally got the sap off the back of my arm from that adventure. But yeah, he was absolutely correct. So we start hiking, and you're hiking down these super, super steep hills and ridges and mountains, and you're hiking down on some loose dirt, so you're kind of sliding into the next plant or sliding down to the next rock, and Walt looks back and is like, "Hey, make sure you lean forward. Let me get this straight. We're on this mountain that if you slip, you're taking a 150-foot ride down some jagged rocks, and hopefully maybe a tree will catch you or something like that, and you want me to lean forward." Roger that. All right, we'll do our best. But it was funny, over the course of the trip, you started to get comfortable with the fact that right to your left is probably certain doom. And you're gonna slide a little bit, and some of the stuff's gonna chuck off, and people are gonna slip a little bit, and you're gonna think they're gonna fall off the face of the earth. He was never wrong, but accepting that reality took a little time.
Yes, there was some question about, am I really going to jump into this?
Yeah, but it was so much fun setting up and hanging out with Walt. He's a wealth of information and just truly an exceptional human being. It's a privilege to be able to spend time with him. Being out there on an adventure, I mean, you got your legs hanging off the side of a cliff while you're putting bolts in the hangers for the straps and all that, and he's rappelling down. It's just this truly epic adventure that really completed the whole experience for us. I had as much fun setting up and tearing down, I think, as I did actually shooting the match.
I don't know if people truly understand, and I'm not sure that we really understood everything else administratively that would have to be done to organize the whole thing. Just simply to be able to participate and help, you realize if he wasn't able to do it, you're not going to have a match. You're not going to have a plate set up. If cameras weren't in position, it would be virtually impossible to score or understand it.
Kind of talk us through what practice day looked like. I understand you made a 2-mile hit.
Yeah.
2.1.
Personal best.
So so on Saturday, we go get our rifles zeroed, which is kind of a funny thing to say, Saturday night.
We've set our zeros higher than 100-yard zero to be even. So we're putting a 90-minute rail on from a 60-minute rail. We're zeroing essentially at about 1,100 yards. So our point of aim down here results in a point of impact that is approximately 30 inches up and 32 inches up between the two guns. So we want to validate the distance offset. We'll enter that in our Kestrel, and it will give us a fire solution then that is adjusted for an offset center.
Cool.
So to get to 2 miles, you need a lot of elevation up. And we normally use a Charlie Terrick unit to mount in front of the scope that adds an extra 100 MOA of travel up. But to make weight, because we have a 40-pound weight limit, we would have been overweight. So to get our more elevation, we increased the angle of the rail from a 60-minute rail to a 90-minute rail. Well, what that means is the scope won't travel down far enough to actually zero in the center of the crosshairs. So we had to do, we're doing if you average the two, it's about a 30-inch offset. So our impacts at 100 yards are 30 inches high, and that allows us, that gives us more travel. So we should theoretically be able to hold dead on a 2-mile target out here with the higher elevation. So that's why we're really high up above where we were actually aiming. Which is pretty funny. Now that's the corrected version, which we'll talk about that here in a minute. So we got that knocked out on Saturday night. And then Sunday, they have Applied Ballistics is out there, so they're doing PDMs, which is a personal drag model. So what that is they actually Doppler radar the flight path of your bullet as it goes out, which is spectacular. It's so kind of those guys to do it. So we're like, all right, we need to go do that. And then Randy Powell was amazing and worked really hard to get the Whittington Center to let us use a practice range out there, which went out to 3,700. And that's a really big deal. We're like, hey, we need to get to the PDM and we need to hit practice day just to confirm a couple of things Sunday morning. Well, they're going to set up cameras and we had more setup to do. We had all the cameras to set up coming into Sunday. Randy was really sweet and he said, hey, we'll get you guys in first on Sunday morning on practice day so you can go help them. Outstanding. That'll be great. We can get knocked out because we really wanted to help them throughout the whole thing and not leave these guys hanging. So we get out there, we get everything set up, we got the Kestrels, we got all our data pulled. Mike has all the targets and our iPad, all that data set, all his data set in the Kestrel, and there's a camera issue. So we're sitting, well, when you have a camera issue at 3,700 yards, you have to take a side-by-side down through the mountains. Well, it's a half-hour drive, so we have an hour. So we're sitting, chatting, we're just hanging out, because, right, we got everything ready to go.
Yep.
What could go wrong? Emotional roller coaster begins drop-off. So as soon as Randy's pulling back up to the line and we're about to shoot, Mike picks up his Kestrel and it has wiped all of his target data out of his Kestrel. So he's scrambling to try and input it. It's still acting twitchy, so he ends up running my data. Well, there are two problems with him running my data. One, our guns have different offsets by about 2 inches. So what I have in my Kestrel as the 0 and what he has in his is different, which changes your data drastically. Two, when we measured it with a tape measure, we cut 1 inch. So we used the 1 inch mark to be more precise and not that. So both of our offsets were 1 inch off. So Mike he's now scrambling, we're feeling compressed, we're trying to rush through. He starts shooting, the data's all off. It's not on because the data in the Kestrel isn't right because he's now using my Kestrel, not his. So we're feeling flustered. We finally figure it out.
Come down at 10.
Right beside it.
Right to left.
Down 1 pit.
So, left one. Right one.
Did you find it? Yeah. 2 dots. 2 targets. 2 dots.
Up at 6.
I would
We
send.
just weren't ready because we thought.
Impact.
There you go.
About
The right target.
7 inches right of center and 2 inches up.
Out. We get him his hit at 2 miles. And at this point, you got a lot of people who are trying to shoot on practice day. We've been taking too long. So you're feeling compressed because you don't want to hold everybody else up. So Mike hits 2.1 miles, comes off the line just frustrated as can be, as we all are. I still need to do mine, so I hop down, shoot. My data is mediocre as well, so I adjust my velocity and change a couple things. And I end up, I don't get the 2.1, but I'm close enough to where I can kind of confirm that my data is decent, and it's no longer worth it to hold everybody else up just so I can hit that plate. So we come off the line and we're like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. We're screwed, you know, because the data's not quite right. We get all our gear moved and we start thinking about it. Talk about the offset. Yeah, so we input that. The data gets a lot closer. Tweak our velocity a little bit, and all of a sudden our data lines up. So you're like, we still feel like crap because it did not go well at all. But by the same token, we have an answer. So now we need to go help the guys with cameras. So we run out and we end up doing the PDM first, and we run that, and sure enough, it matches my corrected ballistic solution. So that's cool. Mike ends up lining up, and we're like, all right. So then we make it back and we start helping set up cameras. I think we have a shot here.
Yep.
The world is now back somewhat round. It was yet another iteration of this emotional roller coaster going into it. So we help them get the camera set up, and then we go for dinner. It was really funny eating dinner because our true inner nerdiness comes out. Mike's got his iPad out there with our mother of all Excel spreadsheets. And we have 4 Kestrels cascaded out on this table while we're eating, and we're all plugging in targets and extracting information out of it, you know, into our wind sheet. It was really kind of a hilarious thing. I'm not sure what the waitress was thinking, but I'm pretty sure it was comical.
Yeah, what are these boys doing?
So, okay, I'll interject here. So, out of the 3 of us, I'm just a complete newbie to ELR and all that sort of stuff.
Same. Send it. Hit. Same. Send it. Hit. Same. Send it. Hit. Same. Send it. Hit. That's freaking awesome. Wow. You know, he was running that bolt gun so good that I don't think you could outshot it with a semi-automatic.
In my head, 1 mile is extremely far away and have no understanding what that means in yardage and what that distance is. And so I forget what's happening, but we're driving away, and at one point Peter's like, yeah, that's 2 miles, so you just hit 2 miles. And I was like, wait, so how many yards is 2 miles? And they tell me, and then I'm sitting in the back of the car and I'm freaking out. I'm like, holy crap, Mike, you just hit 2 miles. And Mike is still over there obsessing with the data and making sure, because he was so upset it wasn't getting right. And for like that whole trip, I'm just like freaking out because 2 miles, that's insane. I mean, that is the very last target in King of 2 Mile, and he went further than that. And it didn't even faze him. He was still making sure that the data for competition day was there. And so it just didn't faze him. And the entire day I'm like punching Mike. I'm like, you just hit 2 miles. That's so crazy. Yeah, that's when it really hit me, just like how crazy these distances are and just how casual these two are and how well their system works, that they can hit 2+ miles on practice day and just be more concerned with the data that they have than the actual hit.
There was a lot of woo-saw happening on that drive down the hill. There was...
We didn't sink it.
We have answers now. It's going to be okay. There was some quiet reflection.
Yes. I mean, I think, you know, having the Kestrel dump, you know, that's a key to what we're being able to do, but we have backups. So I wasn't overly concerned because we had a backup, but our primary failed. My primary failed. And I put the data in twice and it failed both times, and we had to go to your data. But because the data and because the rifles are so close, we could use and extrapolate off of it and still get hits, but we had to get it correlated. And so just needed a little bit of mental processing to work through what do we need to do, how do we need to do it, be prepared. I want to have redundancies in our systems, and I think we've got that. So it just had to go through that mental checklist of manage it, deal with it, process it, what's our plan. So the 2-mile hit was, it's great, but it's practice. It was my personal best, and it was a solid hit. So, and we were right around the target a couple of times. So, no, it is a big deal, and I was happy about it. But for sure, in the moment, it was that was not the most important thing. It was what failed, why did it fail, what do we need to do to get back on it and get it fixed. The loading plan, we had set up the 10 rounds that were going to be for the PDM very close to what our match rounds were, from a weight and neck tension standpoint. So when we shot those, and we ended up shooting really tight groups, essentially shooting at a rock, virtually a mile down range.
Literally a rock.
And then to see the PDM data come back, it was a satisfying accomplishment to say we'd got 10 more rounds. They hit where we wanted them to consistently, and we have good PDM data. So, leaving the PDM range, and at that point, getting our guns weighed, and knowing that they made weight by, about a half a pound, we were set. We actually went to the line confident that we were able to communicate and understand in a truncated way what we needed to see as wind calls. And so we got up there. I shot first. Peter makes the calls, and we ran the whole first string with me shooting with Mandarin wind calls, and there were people set up behind the shooting line listening to what our calls were.
Come down to Lou. Dan Lou.
Up. Yep.
Send.
We're hitting every shot. I didn't even. We're hitting every shot on something.
Come up another 2 times.
Walter Wilkinson, lane 2.
That's not very loud, dude.
Dan Chi.
I have to yell up.
Send. There we go. All right, move up to target 2.
Walter Wilkinson, lane 2. Currently shooting Mike Ackridge.
Mike, come in at E. Come in at E. Let's come in 3/10 up, Mike, if you like those.
The best thing to do is run that ball all the way up, go to target 4, and work your way down. Run the rear bag deal all the way up. Go to target 4, drive ball up.
Mike, Yi Dan Ba. Yi Dan Ba. Yi Dan R. Understood?
Yes.
3/10 up over your calculation on your dial. You should be dialed at 8.4.
I'm at 8.6.
Okay.
Edan R.
Edan R.
Up.
Send. Attaboy. Edan Sand.
Whether they were trying to jump the calls and gain information from what we were doing, or just were curious about what was going on, there were people sitting behind the line very specifically listening that were curiously asking, what are those guys doing?
The joke of it is, probably the only person at that match that would recognize what language it was happened to be one of the guys that was right there. We're like, of course, why wouldn't it have gone that way?
When he came up and said, that was the coolest thing I've seen, that you guys were talking Mandarin, and he actually pulled out Google Translate and had enough within Google Translate to translate what our wind calls were. Nobody else had heard or realized what was going on. He did.
You know, it started out with a goal to disguise our call, and I think ended up 75% for really just our own entertainment.
The novelty of
just the
can we
humor
do it?
of doing it. So, Peter was awesome to really help us coordinate that and roll through it.
Our language coach was drilling us hard,
Killing
helping us understand. So
leading into day one, when Mike shot, it was really cool because we felt like we had our head wrapped around the property, and he got a good draw as well on where he was in the lineup. So it allowed us some time to kind of sit, watch the wind that day, get our head wrapped around what was going on, because we knew the wind was going to be twitchy and we knew it was going to be moving. Then we got set up that morning, and I was able to just sit behind the spotting scope while Peter and Mike took care of everything else, and really just get at home with what's going on in the environment there.
King of 2 Mile, there are some really interesting topography changes, and a 5 degree or 2 degree change in the wind means a wind is going to come across a face, and have a null behind it versus funnel down the front and have an acceleration and a piling up of the wind at the target. Frankly, I didn't shoot as well as I had wanted to. I think the going out to the match, the learning experience of a new property with the inclination that we had, I don't think I set up behind my gun as well as I could have. There were some elements where we were trying to use 2 bags and move down to 1 bag. Hindsight, I would probably modify the process and move the level plate differently and move the bag differently, but we hit all the targets.
Get the next round in the gun right now. You're done. That's it. Got a boy.
It was a big shift in elevation too, because the cold bore target was pretty flat. The next one's not too bad, but the ones after that, there's a pretty big elevation gain. So minus our cold bore, it was pretty neat to be able to hit the rest of the plates on that.
Yeah. The depth of understanding and the adaptability of our process to the different match terrain gives us an opportunity to expect to do well in any match. So day one, I think, was a good success in that we saw a lot of rounds go down range. We both got to read wind. We learned from my first experience, maybe what not to do and what to do in some cases. But leaving that first day, I think I felt more confident that I understood what was going on for your qualification day. And they intentionally separate shooters and spotters that are working together where you're not going to shoot back to back. So we got put into 2 different qualification days.